Hello, in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about how we might go about reading a philosophy text to learn what we want to learn from it, what's going on in it. There are really sort of two tasks. One is what kind of thing do we want to find out, and how do we extract it from the text. And I'm going to just really address that first question in this video. We'll have later videos about how to do the second. To some extent, we already know how to answer questions about text, but we need to know what kind of questions should we be asking. What kind of questions, what is significant in a philosophy text. So in a novel, like a literature or short story, you would want to know, well, who are the characters? What's the plot? What happens? Who does what to whom? What are the themes? What kind of style is it written in? Is it very sort of really descriptive and long sentences, or is it short and terse and to the point? And, are there different events described with different kinds of language and so on? And symbolism. Or there are symbols that are, does a flower or something have some significance, right? If we were reading a history textbook, well, a history textbook tries to tell us what questions we want to answer if we wanted to know what the history wanted to understand the text. Well, we'd want to know, first of all, according to the text, what happened. Maybe the text says, well, we're not sure, maybe this happened or that happened, but we'd want to know what happened, or what are the different stories about what happened. We'd want to know how, according to the text, how do we know, right? What's our evidence? Is it, pottery shards, or videos that were made of what happened, or buildings that are there from, the Mayan, the different Mayan empires, or whatever. So what is our evidence that is what happened? And we might want to know, why did it happen? And not just what happened, but why. Was it because of some sort of important people, or sort of very powerful people decided to make decisions? Or was it because of the weather and the environment? Or was it because of class relations? Or, and who owned, which pieces of property, and whatever it was, right? We want to know, why did that, given what happened, why did it happen? And we might also want to know, how does it bear on the present? So, how does the different facts in U.S. history about wars or racial injustice or whatever, how does that bear on the present? Those are the different things that questions a history text might try to answer. And so if we wanted to understand the text, we'd want to know what those answers were. If we were reading a science textbook, we would want to know, well, what are the facts in the theory? Maybe it's telling us about the theory of evolution, or theories about laws of motion, or describing the parts of the body. We might want to know, what is the evidence for the theory? So what is the evidence for evolutionary theory? Or what is evidence that there are atoms and protons and neutrons and electrons? What experiments did people do that led them believe that that's a correct description of the world? And what are the consequences of the theory? If the theory is true, what does that mean for us and for our interactions with the world? So what about in a philosophy text? Well, let's think about that. And we can think about the Hume and the Paley and the James and Darwin, and thinking about, what sorts of questions did those came up in those texts that you'd want to be able to answer to say, oh, I understood the reading. So one thing is there any special vocabulary? If so, what special vocabulary, or specific ways that words were used? So most notably, for what we've been reading, we want to know, what do the authors mean by God? And James and Paley mean something like a perfect being. Hume maybe something a little bit different, but we'd want to know that. What question are the authors trying to answer? And all of the different authors certainly Hume and Paley, and to some extent James, maybe not so much Darwin in what we read, are answering the question, does God exist? So we would want to know, what are their answers? So Hume, or Paley, basically says yes, and Hume says more or less no. At least if by God we mean perfect being, no. If by God we have a bigger meaning, whatever it is that's the creator of the universe, then maybe. Why do they think their answer is correct? Yeah. Well, so Paley gives us the design argument, Hume gives us the problem from evil argument, and so on. What might be important consequences of their answer? Well, so for James, we might think, well, James says, look, if I am right, then you can go and connect with God, even if about sort of when it's okay to believe in God or who should believe in God. Then you could go and connect with God, or at least try to connect with God, without having sufficient or decisive evidence that God exists. Of course, it might turn out that God doesn't exist, and so your opportunity when you try to connect with God, it fails just because God doesn't exist. But it could make sense to try, even without absolute evidence or powerful evidence that God exists. You take that gamble. Do they have central examples? So Paley certainly does with the watch, and Hume has his four circumstances, and James has the analogy with someone maybe making a marriage proposal. Do they defend their answer against possible criticisms? Well, we didn't focus on this so much, and James does to some extent. Paley also, if you remember, he talks about how, watches are imperfect, and we don't know how they're made, and so on. But even though watches are imperfect and we don't know how they're made, nonetheless, we're still supposed to believe that if we found a watch, we would still believe it was created by someone. And Paley wants to say, hey, look, the world's the same way, even though maybe the world is imperfect and we don't know how the world is made, still we have reason to believe that it was created by a more or less perfect being. So these are the sorts of questions that arise in a philosophy text. These are the questions that when we read a text, we want to be able to answer knowing the answers to these questions is what we need to know in order to understand the text. So is there special vocabulary or words used in specific ways? What is the philosopher's question? What is their answer? Why is their answer correct, or at least according to them? And so in particular, that's probably going to be what is their argument? Why does their answer matter? Why should we care that that's the correct answer? Why would it matter if that were the correct answer? Do they have central examples? And what defenses of their answers do they give? For the Mill, so you now have a little reading assignment that's starting to focus on these reading issues. So I'd like you to answer these. For our current module, for the utilitarianism module, you're going to read excerpts from John Stuart Mill's book, Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, as you'll see, is an ethical theory. It's a theory about what we should do, what's right to do, what's wrong to do. So for the module, there are two assignments. There's a reading assignment and there's a quiz. The quiz comes after the videos, but you won't be able to get to the video links until you've completed and submitted this first assignment, which is it's only 3 points, so it's not a big deal one way or the other, but you do need to submit an answer to it. And it's just answering these 3 questions. So first, what is the main question that you think Mill wants to answer? Second, what do you think is Mill's answer to that question? And third, Mill uses several words and phrases in specific ways that he defines and explains. So I want you to say, what is one of those words? What do you think his specific definition is? So each of these, the first 2 can be answered in 1 or 2 sentences. The third may take 3. So it's not a whole lot to do. Having these questions in mind will actually help you to understand the reading. So you'll do the reading with these questions in mind, answer what you think those questions are, and then you can watch the videos, and then you'll be in a position to take the quiz on the material. So that's what we have that's this first assignment, and we'll be talking in more detail about how to get into sort of specific pieces of text. But when you're approaching a text, you want to know, what am I trying to get out of this? What do I want to know? What kinds of things should I know that are, if I really understand the text? And having those questions in mind is helpful when you start to sit down to read the text. There are lots of questions that might occur to you, like, what do I find interesting about this? And do I agree with this? And so on. And those are good questions to ask, but they're not so much questions about understanding the text. They're questions about what are you going to take away from the text. And we want to keep those separate just so that they don't get confused. Because if we get confused about, like, well, if I'm just reading this to see, like, what's sort of exciting to me about it, that's a fine thing to do, but we want to then be clear that, if I'm just reading this for interest for me, then I may not be so clear about what the text is actually saying. So if you want to understand the text, you want to separate out these questions of what is it doing and should I care about it, or why do I care about it? What does it mean to me? They're all good questions. We're focused right now on these comprehension questions. So good luck with that. If you have any questions, please let me know.